Bienvenidos a un episodio más de Reinventándonos podcast, un podcast donde invitamos a personas que se están enfrentando a un cambio organizacional o bien nos están dando herramientas para reinventarnos hoy para el futuro. Pues el día de hoy nos encontramos con una entrevista ahora sí a larga distancia. Nuestro invitado viene desde Australia, entonces está viviendo realmente un día más adelante que nosotros. Ese es Cameron Tonkinwise. Directly from the land under, so down under in Australia. So welcome to the show, Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. So I tell you, the audience that you are living in the future. We are in Monday here in this side of the planet, and you are in Tuesday noon.
Yes. And I should apologize for forcing this to be in English. I always feel that it's necessary to say it's sad to be more or less monolinguistic, and of course it's been a horrible colonializing force around the world. So I'm always apologetic for being part of the Anglosphere.
Don't worry, we are used to like English speaking, and well, I'm fan of the Australian accent, so will be nice. So we're gonna start with the checking round, so we can know you or know each other better. So we are beginning the year 2024. We're the January the 8th. So if you have any project that make you feel very enthusiastic or we feel like very illusionate right now, starting the year.
So where we are, it's very hot at the moment, although it's proved to be a little wetter than had been anticipated. And I'm in the middle of doing work with colleagues, which is looking at the way people in social housing in Western Sydney, where I live, are coping with the heat in very poorly designed housing that has not been designed to tolerate this type of heat, even the existing heat, but definitely not the coming heat. So that's just a carryover project that we're doing, and it's a wonderful project because it's field work and it's design based, and it's with people who definitely are not part of the privileged set of people in Sydney. I think the one project that I'm going to do this year, I'm not sure if I could say I'm enthusiastic about it. I've been trying to audit sort of design education around the world, particularly this part of the world. And I'm been trying to research just how much contextual and critical design education designers are getting. And I've been discovering that it's not much and that it is reducing. That again is only, I think, in the Anglosphere. It's particularly in the very neoliberal higher education system of Australia. But I think designers are getting purely practical education, and they're not being sufficiently well educated in terms of contextual and critical studies. So one of the outcomes of this project will actually be to begin creating platforms in which people anywhere who are interested, who are practitioners and are interested to learn more about design, about critical and contextual study around design, can come and ask, and it will be a kind of matching service to match people with capacity like myself to teach and what it is they would like to learn. So I'm quite excited to begin experimenting with that, because I think it's very important that designers be much better educated than they mostly are these days.
Lovely. So we want to talk about this a little bit in this podcast, in this episode. So it will be lovely and getting deeper in this conversation. And in my side, I'm happy because we are in a project to the city, trying to do some foresight and to imagine the city that we could live better. How can we live better? And that's good from our city of Monterrey. And in personal level, I finally start to prepare for a marathon the last year I can't because I suffered an injury in my hand, and then personal and family topics. But I'm happy in that way too. So keep me moving.
Excellent. Good luck with that. I'm carrying a shoulder injury at the moment also, which is, it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
It's we pretend to think we are beyond sort of Cartesian mind-body split, that we're all happy to think about ourselves as being embodied and inactive. And then your body starts failing, and I get very annoyed at it, as if it's not me. Like, why is my shoulder in so much trouble? And so it's at that point that I realize I'm still quite Cartesian, still quite a mind getting mad with a body, which is failing slowly. Yeah. So I hope yours is repaired.
Yeah, we'll see how it works, because then marathon is step by step, and then you reach some distance and begin up to the 30 kilometer to see if it's all right, and I will notice. But I think it's getting good, and it's patience. But yeah, I think your shoulder is more, it's harder. Yeah, because it's always moving. So
yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, very frustrating.
Well, getting into the, I love, and I got into you with things on LinkedIn, and some colleagues and friends that give light to your articles, to your post publications on there, and I figured out, well, you have a great background. We're gonna talk about also like you have a PhD, holding a PhD on philosophy. Later on, we're gonna talk about philosophy a little bit. But if you can tell us a little bit what you do in your day-to-day, and what you were, if you are also like a professor of design studies, if you can please get deeper on it, please.
Okay. So my day job is teaching design studies to undergraduates. So these are subjects that are common to product, fashion, and communication designers. Mm-hmm. And that's an undergraduate bachelor's degree. And all those different designers are learning how to design in their studio. And then in addition, they get what I was calling before contextual critical studies of design, around design. So when I go to a party and I'm talking to someone who's not a designer, I say to them that my job is to teach them everything a designer needs to know beyond what they learn how to do in a studio. So somebody's teaching them how to design, and I'm teaching them about design. But that often I think the job of design studies is to get designers to think about the consequences of what they're designing. And a good outcome is if they decide not to design. Wow. So if their studio education is learning how to design, their design studies education is learning why not to design. So I try to sort of explain it that way, which is a bit silly. I teach service design at a postgraduate level. And then I have PhD students mainly focused on transition design, which is using design to affect social systems change. And then I do research mostly in transition design. And these are projects often in energy, sustainable energy, or often new types of attitudes towards money and banking, sometimes to do with urban planning and new types of settlement strategies and things like that. So those are the types of research projects that I try to do. But as you mentioned, I'm currently trying to finish a manuscript which is on a kind of philosophy of design, which is a collection of things I've written over the last 20 years. And I'm trying to edit that up into a book. So that's another thing that I'm kind of doing. So it's a lot of different things, but it's a very privileged life as an academic. So I get to do applied design research, and I get to teach, and I get to sort of constantly be exposed to the leading edge of design in terms of what the students go and do, and once we've taught them, hopefully sufficiently.
Lovely. It sounds pretty inspirational. And when I read your background also, because in Mexico we have design or probably sometimes we are not. Well, I'm not a designer myself, but I have colleagues or even my partners have a design background, and when they explain and they try, okay, this is design, this is not design. But I love it, an article that you have like a design school, design philosophy, and I love it when you say how can you can design a good school, and all the things that you just said now. And I love it, a quote I will quote here because it's amazing, and I want the audience to listen to it. When you say that a design school is after a kind of meta designing, those of us privileged to teach in design schools are designing the designing of designers. We're responsible for how designers design the world. And I love it because there's a lot of pedagogy inside behind, so you can explain how can you design a good design. So, and how can you, the academia organizations take designers seriously? Well, here in Mexico, I think we are a step behind a little bit. So it will be lovely to hear you.
I'm not actually sure. That research I mentioned before into who is doing good contextual and critical design education. I'm in fact finding that there is a lot more critical and contextual study of design, particularly in Central and South America. So some examples in Chile and Mexico and Colombia are places I would love to be teaching because it is actually really strong. So I think you might be ahead now, and I think there is something for sort of old North Atlantic based design education to learn from the way design education is beginning to happen there. Yes, it's certainly true. I think, so you mentioned before, I have a background in philosophy. So I kind of came to design via a design theorist called Tony Fry and started working with him in sustainable design. And so I often say that I think I believe in the power of design often more than most designers, because I'm not myself a designer. I have a quite idealistic view of it. And that idealism also comes through in that quote about design education. I think all education is a type of designing. You are designing how people receive knowledge and know-how, and you are designing to some extent what they will go and do with it, which is the same as designing a platform that delivers information and helps people use it in a particular way. So education is a type of designing, which means if you're educating designers, you're designing designers. You're actually creating what it is they will pay attention to. So I'm always surprised when design schools do not explain their mission and vision of design and just teach design as it has always been taught. I would think every design school is an opportunity to articulate a new vision of design and to begin to demonstrate that vision in how you teach, in how you create the curriculum, how you create the school, how the experience happens. And that's what I mean by saying I think every design school could be a type of meta designing of the way in which design happens. And I'll just add one small point, which is I think all designing is always a choice about what it is of the past that you are maintaining, what past materials and habits and values are maintained and which ones are changed. You can't change them all. You can try with a revolution, but it's difficult. It's why I focus more on transition. You can change things at a time. Over time, everything will change. But any act of designing is a decision about what you are choosing to preserve and what you are choosing to change. And I think when you think about it that way, every design school should be very explicit about what it is trying to preserve and what it's trying to change. And I think if a design school doesn't say what its mission and vision is, then it is preserving things without declaring that it's preserving them.
Hmm.
It's maintaining the status quo. It's educating to business as usual. It's maintaining particular systems of convenience and particular systems of cost and value. And I think it's very dangerous when you are designing the perpetuation of certain systems without explicitly deciding to. You can be conservative. You can be a conservative design school and say, we are trying to maintain these values, these systems. I think it would be more interesting to go to a design school that's saying, we are trying to change these systems and these values. But I just think it always surprises me how there have been, obviously, in the history of design, many design schools that have strong design philosophies. So, you know, the Hochschule für Gestaltung at Ulm, the Ulm School, very famous mission-driven school, the different versions of the Bauhaus, the Chicago Bauhaus, these all had strong visions. You know, a lot of the schools that were set up in India also, they were very explicit about what they were doing. But the design schools in Australia, they never, ever talk about what their actual mission is. So, yeah, that post was an attempt to kind of say, I think it's possible and necessary that design schools be explicit about this kind of meta designing.
That's lovely, because I think also not only in design, also nowadays the universities in general lose a little bit of their initial purpose to find more truth, to be more like a place of thinking, a place of rediscovering and debate. And today we see many universities more like want to have more people that get into the university that actually disrupt or think, or, as you said, don't be explicit about what they are looking for, or trying to be like the business as usual. We are like we are preparing you for be employable when you finish this. So that's a great point, and I think it's happening a lot.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, again, even if you just take that conservative, I think, project of trying to make, in Australia, they call it making people job ready. Even that, it's strange to think, well, which jobs, where and when? Do you just want the current versions of jobs? Many jobs are changing. What the world needs people to be doing, what people will be able to do is shifting. So are you designing people to do design work now, or are you designing people to do the design work that will be done in 10 years' time in very different climate conditions, for example? So if you're designing anybody who's making anything in the domestic sphere, as I said at the beginning, we're doing work on the moment that many dwellings in Australia in particular, and I think also in Mexico, will begin to be, people will be living in 5-6 degrees difference in, you know, really significant weather change, really significant. So are you designing for jobs now, or are you designing for climate changed jobs? And again, just be explicit about how futuristic you are being in that regard.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things that I see in particular also in your articles and many things are this systemic view. And well, when you I came from the studying law and being a lawyer, and then a little bit of philosophy too, and suddenly get into more leadership or design, and then agile, and then human-centered design, and then foresight, and like trying in an exploring way and a curious way. But I always notice that, or I see frequently that we see like more people that are more agile way, and then people from human-centered design, and then people for foresight. And I don't know how can we create more a systemic view, or is convenient or not convenient to have a more systemic view, or you think that design should be like see like separately, individual, but I don't know how is your vision of or design.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not individual. I think this is part of the problem that design in its European form over the 20th century ended up in a consultancy model, which is quite competitive. And it's very difficult to create a culture of practice, a community of practice amongst designers who are prepared to share anything about their work, and particularly share failures and be open to criticism. Now, often this is because clients will enforce intellectual property and non-disclosure agreements, but often it is also the psychology of designers to always be trying to self-promote. And so they often will be reticent to really adopt a community of practice in which they are sharing what it is that they have learned with others. So there's a lot of sort of competition, and there really isn't good communities of practice. There's a research community, a very, I think, don't tell anyone I said this, but a very dull design research society that I just think tries to be, again, pluralist, as you said about universities. They just try to cater to everybody and offend no one. And so I think design research pretends to be academic and is just very open. So it's very difficult for people to start saying, okay, I want to have a community of practice which is mission driven, which is trying to do this particular change. So I think we have to start to get people talking. Then they will begin to notice bits of the system that they're not working in. They work here, but they begin to hear about a bit of the system here. And that's when they can start to make the connections. You can never build a map alone. If you're going to map a system, you have to do it collaboratively. You need people experiencing different parts of the system contributing. You need triangulation to validate whether you've experienced this bit of the system correctly. So we need to be building collective maps of the system, the systems that we're trying to change. And that requires these communities of practice and people conversing. I would actually even go a bit further and say I've been experimenting with trying to convince some design practitioners to create a conspiracy, to actually begin to actually conspire. So to be a community of practice behind closed doors who might break non-disclosure agreements in a kind of Chatham House way, in order that they can begin to tactically work out, I have a client, they're doing this project, I would like them to do this, they don't want to do it, but if something happened in some other domain, and they heard about it, they might start to do this project. So this project could actually be really significant. They're just scared. Can you say to somebody else in the conspiracy, can you just write them an email and pitch them a project like this? And they won't know that we know each other, but suddenly they'll think, wow, the system is changing. We have these designers. They suggested we do this. Maybe we should do this. So that's the really conspiratorial version. The less conspiratorial version is to say, often if I do a project, I'll do a project with a client, and there's great potential there. Something has happened, but it's only going to lead to system change if other people know about it and can start to get their clients to do the same thing. Suddenly you've got two clients doing the same thing in different sectors, and suddenly it creates a system effect because there are small changes happening at different leverage points. But you can only do that if you are prepared to begin to conspire and not just do one project, another project, another project, but instead be part of an alliance of people who are loosely affiliated and trying to bring about different types of change. So it's quite dangerous talking this way because I'm actually trying to start a conspiracy. But I think it would give designers a lot more agency if they did. and it would help with this kind of systems change that you're talking about. But I might be on a completely wrong track. I pitched it to a local service design company, and they got very scared and they stopped talking to me. So I don't know. I'll talk to somebody else about it now.
Well, it depends. Actually, we got some friends in Bilbao that is called Think Tank, Think Innovation and Trends in Bilbao in Spain. And I don't know if it's probably, well, they help, for example, in Basque Country in Spain, they are very united. So when they got up a project about some trends, they used to, and the client said, why not you invite our colleagues or our competency, because it's good to the ecosystem to change. But I don't know, probably depends also of the city. There's many variations how often the people are in the cities or
I mean, I think there's sort of three ways to do it. One was the conspiracy way I described it.
Yeah.
The second is, as you just described, actually trying to get competitors in the same industry to declare a truce and get into a room and actually talk about what would be good for all of them. And sometimes that means going to an industry association. So my colleague, Kees Dorst, talks about the fact that if you're trying to do innovation in a company, you do innovation projects here and you try and push them up, and they try to change the culture of the company. But invariably, it hits a kind of barrier. At that point, going to the industry association, you change the ecosystem, and then that top-down will open the door for these innovations to come up. So he calls that sector-based innovation. But a third way is also that I was kind of alluding to is you don't necessarily have to get competitors together. You actually get allied people in the supply chain or in the ecosystem, particularly if we're talking about cities, who are not directly competing because you do this transport, you do this food, you doing this housing, and they can begin to make a loosely coupled sort of collaboration across the supply chain in that way. So I think you can do it in those three ways. You can conspire as the designer, you can do industry association, and then you can do this kind of transect version of a conspiracy.
That sounds cool, and get me to the other question, because you got a lovely article about the collective impact of not transitional design, and first of all, I like to talk about, if you can talk about a little bit of transition design, because we heard a little bit, but there's not at least on the mainstream, and I think it's have a good role. And also you said before that sometimes we have to choose what we're gonna stop doing and what we wanna do. So if you want to explain this, I think it will be awesome to the audience to hear about that transition design.
Okay. So transition design is the attempt to work out how what I would call human scale designers, so designers of handleable things, which might be digital or products, spaces, how that scale of designer can actually help social system change. So big changes, everything changes. How can designers who only ever get to do this or that contribute to a system change so that we can get to more equitably sustainable ways of living, for example? And I think the first insight comes from the fact that any big change will have a kind of bottleneck, which is the interaction design of the way in which the big system interfaces with people. So if I am trying to change the whole energy system to get out of fossil fuels and go to renewables, at some point, those renewables interface with me in this house, through something, through a screen, through an app, through something in my garage or on my roof or something. There's always some human scale design. And I think a lot of people who think about change have forgotten that even though design is small, it's really crucial in the sense that it's at the crux of a change, and that if you're actually going to get big infrastructures changing, you need to work out how to get people to interact with them differently. So that's the first insight. And then the second insight that transition design works with is whenever there's a problem, whenever a problem arises, a problem that somebody thinks a designer could help solve, there's always two ways of solving it. Often in UX, they talk about solve for these types of people, solve for this type of market. So I'm trying to use that language to say, I think you should always solve for two things, not one. If you solve for one thing, you're just trying to solve this pain point, this job to be done, this obstacle, this problem somebody has. You're just trying to solve it for them precisely so that the system can stay the same. But there's always a way in which you can solve a problem in a way that you actually are also creating a platform or an experience of different ways of living that can begin to be an example of the change. So you're not doing the change, but you are making people more prepared for the change, and they've become prepared because of the way you've solved the particular problem. So I give you a quick example. One is just if you go to that energy one, if I'm going to move from centralized fossil fuel, big coal-fired power station, electricity coming to my house, then I have a very passive relation to electricity. I sign up a contract, and then the power comes, and then at the end of the month, I get what's called bill shock because I've used a lot of electricity and I have to pay. And then, but mostly it's what they call set and forget.
Yeah.
So the system we have isn't just coal-fired and centralized. It's about passive consumers of energy. Now, I can just switch out that and make it a great big solar farm, but that will be interfacing with me. I'll still get a bill, but the way the bill is designed can actually also open new behaviors where I begin to get a sense that the electricity coming through this system is very different and that there are new energy practices. I can now actually store some of the electricity in my house with a battery. I can choose when I'm going to use the electricity. I can begin to actually even generate the electricity on my own roof, and then I can choose to send it to people or receive it. So suddenly I'm an energy switch. I'm not just a user. So if you design any problem I have with the system with a view to that whole new coming system of distributed energy, you're preparing people for the transition. You're not doing the energy transition, but you're certainly not blocking the energy transition by only designing in the way people currently think about energy. Set and forget, convenience, efficiency, low cost. You're beginning to expose them to very different ways of thinking. So transition design is all about finding those leverage points and solving not just for now, but for future system as well. So you're always trying to do double design. And it means that you're not only designing for convenience and cost and automation, you're designing for new worldviews, new values, new habits, actually like material practice change, people doing things differently. So yeah, transition design tries to sort of find these problems and use them as opportunities to open up to new systems and not to close every problem, use it as a way of closing and keeping the system as is. So again, you have to always be slightly subversive in the way you solve the problem. It's not going to be the easiest solution to sell to a client, but it can be the one that you sell, which means you're part of a larger transition.
And it's lovely because at the same time, I love when it makes you it helps that the future actually happens because we always say that future sometimes is so far because we're not making it personal. We don't make it okay, how our habits change, how is that scenario changing what is surrounded with, or what problems are causing, or even what are the competitors, or what's happening in that when that service or the product or that change is happening actually.
Yeah. Well, so if I can add one last point, one last crucial part of transition design is what we sometimes call prefigurative design practice, which means it's very important to not try to second guess what people want, and not just to prototype it and then user test it, but to actually recognize that you're asking people to change how they live, at least a bit of how they live. And that's something that takes time. And so you need to create safe spaces in which people can have an experience of the future, not just in a focus group or in an hour, but for a month. Like say, try to live this way for a month. Then you will really see its value. And if you see its value, you'll see how you need to begin to modify everything else to make space for this new practice. So it's a very different type of innovation, because you are wanting people to be partners in the innovation, and you're wanting them to give quite a lot of time to not just doing a lab test of a future, but to actually experience the future now, to have a pocket of the future in how they live in the current system. And if you can make those robust, if people really a number of people start doing them, then when the system begins changing, they're ready to begin doing that future, and they won't just be doing it in a protected space. It can start to be a model for different ways of living. So it's a matter of not just thinking about the future, but actually building pockets of the future that people can experience in a really everyday, lengthy process that actually is going to reveal its desirability and how to actually make it viable. Instead of assuming people won't do it, don't worry, it's too hard. People just want everything faster and cheaper. It's not true. People want different ways of living. It's just that it's really hard in a race of time to find the space to really try out some new way of living. So I think it's very important that future foresighting in particular starts to work with designers to create these field experiments that have some longevity to them. They don't just happen in quick, agile cycles.
I completely agree. And I think that also help us be more empathetic. And at the end, innovation, I like to say that is to have better, your design is to have a better life, and to have at the end, invite many people from many contexts to actually making the things happen in the better way, and in a way that actually people want and feel comfortable about it. I think it's a pretty nice role or calling for designers to think about it,
And to give people space and time to get comfortable with something that they might initially say, I can't do that, I won't do that. So comfort is something you come to. It's not something that just is. And that's the point, that transition design is about creating spaces in which people can learn to become comfortable with different ways of living. So yeah, I like that you use that word, as long as it doesn't mean just set ideas about comfort, but instead something that you can eventually become comfortable with new ways of living.
Probably, and I don't want to let this interview finish and not talk about the philosophy. You call a PhD in philosophy, and that's awesome. And I like philosophy. I'm not a philosopher, but I like it. And sometimes, we live in a very pragmatic world and fast world. And sometimes the philosophy, they say, it's useless. Oh, it's okay. It's a nice to have, or it's a good thing. And okay, I can find in a good tech talker or something in YouTube, and it will be good to me. But actually, how philosophy helps you, or how do you think it helps you to create your way of seeing things, or your mindset? How do works philosophy for you?
It is weird that I studied philosophy and then haven't been a philosopher, and yet it does have these habits of ways of talking and ways of questioning that I realize, it takes me a long time to realize how foreign they are to a lot of people, that I just had the privilege of being able to naturalize, being able to sort of question obvious things and really always be interested in where ideas are coming from and what their consequence or entailments are. And then realizing that just kind of came unintentionally from having that background. And I say that because I'm in design, and I'm in design because I always think all design is doing that type of philosophy. I think someone once said, design is philosophy with the hands. And what I mean is, every time you have a design project, you are being asked to fundamentally question what some category of thing is. So if I'm a furniture designer and someone comes to me and says, can you design me a chair? They might have constraints on the brief, design me a chair for an office worker of the future, something, they might say that. But to do the project, I have to start to think, what is a chair? I have to kind of be like Plato and start asking very annoying questions like, so what is chair? What does chairing do? Why do we have chairs? What are all the different cultures of sitting? Why do we need our weight taken away from us? Why do we have bodies that we have to kind of get rid of? I'm talking to you standing at the moment, but I'm resting, leaning forward, resting. So I'm still not carrying all my weight on my feet. I am now. But, so I just give that as an example to say, if I'm designing a chair properly, I will do a philosophy of chairs. I will ask fundamentally, what is chairs? And then I'll ask, what else could chairing be? I'll do counterfactuals. I will start, let's imagine a completely different world. Let's not solve the problem of sitting. Let's take away gravity. Let's all sort of float. What would it mean to have the office of the future in space on a very long trip somewhere? Very bad idea. I think we should just look after this planet now. But some people want to do that. And you sort of don't need chairs in space. Or I remember a beautiful design project I once saw, I think at KIST, Cologne International School of Design. I think it was there. And they were doing a chair for a medic in the back of an ambulance. So they would be strapped into this chair and could have mobility to lean over and be doing medical while the van is driving down the street. And so if you try and imagine that type of chair, you're doing chair philosophy. So though I had this habit of thinking philosophically just by accident because I wasn't a very good philosopher, and then found that I could be in design, the reason I thought I should feel comfortable is I kept thinking, everyone, whenever you do this, if you do a website, you're rethinking websites. If you're doing a poster, you're rethinking posters. If whatever it is you are designing, you have to be philosophic about it. And what's really interesting is that they are experimental philosophers who can actually not just do a thought experiment, like Nietzsche. What is the eternal return? Let's imagine I had a demon on my shoulder who said you will live everything as you were living exactly the same. They don't just think it. They actually say, okay, well, let's build a game in which you experience the same thing over and over, and let's see. So I do think it's really important that designers sort of tap into that philosophic way of thinking. I think when designers do that, they're designing at their best. It is true, however, as you say, that design has been part of this thing that has made a society that is all about, the number one selling book on website design for a long time was a book called Don't Make Me Think, which is like the most horrifying thing you could possibly say. And There's a certain version of design where you definitely want what you're designing to just disappear behind what it's enabling. But it should always be able to come back into presence so that somebody can fix it or change it or understand how it's manipulating them. So designers have been part of the problem in that they've made a world that has a lot of people rushing around and being intolerant of questioning and thinking that fundamental questioning is useless and you should only do what is useful. Whereas you can only discover the useful by asking useless questions. And that's the moment at which you discover new uses, new worlds, new ways of being, new ways of experiencing the world. And you become a way of actually being a change agent, to paraphrase badly, because it's in a thoroughly capitalist realm, but Marx, to kind of say in the thesis on Feuerbach, the job is not just to think the world, but to change it. And that's the kind of philosophy that I think designers can do. That's why I pivoted and redirected my life to design. I think you can actually do more philosophy as design than you can in philosophy, which these days, yes, is academic arcanery or very bad podcasts and TED Talk. So yeah, I kind of think where people are really thinking sometimes is in the making of new ways of living.
And as you say, in interactive philosophy also brings the past, the present, the future, and how it relates to the other subjects and disciplines of life and work. So
yeah.
you probably now doing it automatically, but it's philosophy behind.
It's kind of interesting because it's always thought of as being a very serious, ponderous kind of thing to do. I'm just reading, Ian Bogost wrote a book a few years ago called Play Everything, and I'm just listening to it. And I think he makes a very convincing case that even philosophy brings joy because it's a kind of way of playing with the world, and it makes the world interesting. In the same way that I think designers think the world is interesting. The world is interesting because it's changeable, it's perfectible, it's alterable, its direction can be changed. So I get a lot of joy out of the little philosophy education I had, because it has just made a habit where, you really don't get bored because you're just always thinking, why is that like that? Could it be some other way? And I think the best designers are doing that type of questioning all the time. And it's the reason why I think a lot of people like designers who aren't designers, and why we had the complete misstep that was design thinking, where non-designers tried to be like designers. And what they were trying to get access to were these people who were always interested in things, both material things and ideas, values, practices. So I do find that my life is privileged on the one hand and very frustrated on the other. Philosophy is a nice practice, a nice exercise, a nice ritual to have.
Yeah, well, we have talked about many topics, and I think there's many could be other podcasts about something in specific, and that probably brings us another time to talk. And I really enjoy all the all our talk and all the answers you have and reflections, and only we have a lot of things to do and to reflect and to get into debate, but for this is the podcast to make us think and to see that other people around the world is doing and is trying to do things better, and invited many people to actually be part of that. So thank you for answering all these questions and for this conversation.
No, it was a real privilege to be asked the questions and to be given the time and space to answer. I'm taking the place of others who I think also say probably more interesting things than me, but I really thank you for the chance to speak about these things. And yeah, I'm always happy to follow up with anybody who wants to hear more. and to help anybody with anything. I'm kind of giving up on my institution at the moment and trying to, as I said before, just teach anywhere and everywhere and learn anywhere and everywhere. So anything anybody wants, just get in contact.
So only to finish our checkout question, what is your image of the future, or what is your best case scenario professionally and personally?
I mean, at a global level, I want degrowth. At a global level, it's controversial to say, so let's say I definitely want global north degrowth. But I want a future in which the world is many worlds, a world of many worlds, to use the kind of Zapatista slogan. And I want Ezio Manzini's phrase, slow, local, open, and connected. I think I want to see a lot more regionally different communities and a lot less globalization and far fewer transnational corporations and no 1%. So that's at a kind of global level. At a local level, as I just said, I want to create more opportunities to be talking to people like yourself. This last year, I've been experimenting, and I will experiment again this year. I'm in a funny part of the world. Even though we're globally connected, I'm sort of feeling kind of isolated from things, and it's been so rewarding to touch people everywhere around the world and get a sense of what's going on and what they are doing and learning with them. And so I'm trying to get to a situation in which that becomes a more professionally regular practice, that I'm spending a lot more time talking to people around the world. So yeah, that's why I say I really appreciate you asking me to speak to you today.
Thank you, Cameron. It really was an honor, and it's very grateful, and will be to the audience to hear you and to see, as you said, love this thing of these more local things, but connected globally too. So it's awesome, and I think I really appreciate that. As I like to say, be very of your city, but also be very of the world. So so it's a cool thing, a good balance.
Yeah, perfect cosmopolitanism. You're a citizen of your city and you're a citizen of the cosmos at the same time. Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I think it's a good place to close our conversation, but for sure we're gonna be in touch, and thank you a lot to be here, Cameron, and enjoy you in the future in Tuesday.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's a nice day here today. Not too hot. Yes. I hope it's as good for you as it has been for me today. Thanks.
Thanks. So, Reinventándonos podcast es dirigido por un servidor Luis Salas y producido por Polymath, una red de consultores que creamos organizaciones ambidiestras. Pues voy a reinventar algo, que estés muy bien. Thank you very much, Cameron. See you around.
Okay.
Thank you.